U.S. President Barack Obama's State of the Union address focuses on economic rebound, lifting the middle class, and fighting terrorism. Economists predict Africa's growth will go beyond oil and commodities in 2015. And a cop shakes it off on camera, earning a hat tip from Taylor Swift herself. Africa 54 starts right now.
Hello and welcome. I'm Vincent McCorry. This is Africa 54. U.S. President Barack Obama took his arguments to the American public in his State of the Union address Tuesday night, focusing on a surging economy and his plans to strengthen the middle class. On foreign policy, Mr. Obama called on a joint session of Congress to vote to authorize military force against the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. VOA's Mary Alice Salinas reports from the White House.
For the first time during his State of the Union address, President Obama faced a Congress led in both houses by Republicans. His message to the opposition party and the public: it's time for America to shift its focus away from the economic hardships of the past.
The shadow of crisis has passed, and the State of the Union is strong. At this moment, with a growing economy, shrinking deficits, bustling industry, booming energy production, we have risen from recession freer to write our own future than any other nation on earth.
The future, the president said, should include a strong middle class that gets a fair chance to prosper.
That's what middle-class economics is. The idea that this country does best when everyone gets their fair shot. Everyone does their fair share. Everyone plays by the same set of rules.
In recent days, President Obama took his case to the people as he toured the country to roll out key agenda items ahead of Tuesday's address. They include higher taxes on the wealthy to help pay for more middle-class tax credits and 2 years of free community college. He also announced plans to expand broadband internet, fight cybercrime, and protect privacy. On foreign policy, the president vowed to keep battling terrorists, including the Islamic State. He called on Congress to pass a new resolution authorizing the use of force against the militant group.
Instead of getting dragged into another ground war in the Middle East, we are leading a broad coalition, including Arab nations, to degrade and ultimately destroy this terrorist group. We're also supporting a moderate opposition in Syria that can help us in this effort, and assisting people everywhere who stand up to the bankrupt ideology of violent extremism. Now, this effort will take time. It will require focus. But we will succeed.
The president heralded a landmark climate change deal with China, U.S. efforts to fight Ebola in West Africa, and he vowed to push forward with Iran nuclear talks and efforts to improve ties with Cuba. The Republican response included promises that the new Congress will fight terrorism, reform the tax code, and trim the budget.
We'll propose ideas that aim to cut wasteful spending and balance the budget with meaningful reforms, not higher taxes like the president has proposed.
Even as President Obama enjoys higher approval ratings,
God bless this country we love.
A recent Pew Research poll found that in the face of stagnating wages, most Americans still have doubts about the economic future of the middle class. Mary Alice Salinas, VOA News, the White House.
Well, as President Obama mentioned in his speech, the U.S. and its allies are continuing to take the fight to the Islamic State. Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi says U.S.-led airstrikes against the Islamic State group have been very effective. But his government expects more help from the international community. In an interview Wednesday in Baghdad with the Associated Press, Mr. Abadi stressed the need for ground fighting and says the training international military advisors are giving Iraqi forces needs to happen more quickly.
There's a lot of things being said and being spoken and very little on the ground. We are very thankful for the air campaign to support our military, but I think you cannot achieve victory without a real fight on the ground, and we are doing this real fight, and we are expecting other countries to match our fight. We don't want anybody to fight with us on this, but we need support and logistics.
Well, the Prime Minister also says Iraq is struggling to find the resources to buy arms and needs to help to get them quickly. President Obama has ruled out sending U.S. ground troops to Iraq. He authorized the air campaign there last August, targeting Islamic State militants. Well, for more on the U.S. efforts against the Islamic State and terrorism, we are joined live via Skype by VOA State Department correspondent Carla Babb. Carla, thanks for joining us. And
thank you for having me.
Let's go straight to the fight against terrorism. Many are not so clear about the U.S. Strategy here. What practically is happening on the ground?
Well, the next phase that's happening on the ground is the United States military is going to be sending trainers in the next 4 to 6 weeks, it says, to help start training Syrian moderate rebels. These are going to be in training locations based in Turkey, based in Qatar, based in Saudi Arabia. There are already trainers on the ground in Iraq, in Anbar Pramats at the Al-Assad base, for example, in Taji. And so they're going to be working with these people who are going to be fighting Islamic State militants to get them better prepared, better trained, teach them how to fight, teach them how to work as a team.
How does this strategy actually work to the benefit of the U.S. While at the same time achieving the effects?
Well, the United States has said multiple times it does not want to put combat troops on the ground. The United States says this is not its war to fight. It is the war of the Syrian people. It is the war of the Iraqi people and the surrounding neighbors in the Middle East that the Islamic State is expanding into their borders as well. So the United States is achieving its aim of stopping the terrorists without actually having to put their own combat boots on the ground as they did in Iraq previously, as they did in Afghanistan.
Now, many people's hearts are also bleeding for the kids that have been taken hostage in Nigeria, and many other people have been killed. And they thought, well, the president should have mentioned something about that. What do you make of it?
Well, the thing I can make out of that is Boko Haram is such a sensitive subject with Nigerians, and the president wanted to come across as a very strong president. Think about it. Most of his speech was on the economy because the economy is doing very well. He talked about the broad coalition because that's something that the United States can take strength on. He talked about the Iranian nuclear program because that's something that's advanced further than it has in a very long time. And so when it comes to Boko Haram, that's still a very fluid situation. They still do not know where the girls are located. The intelligence, the surveillance, the reconnaissance that the United States is giving the Nigerians, there's a struggle back and forth between the U.S. military and the Nigerians on how well it's being used, how much access is being given. There are still things between the United States and Nigeria. For example, the military training that the United States was going to provide Nigeria, it wasn't completed. They both pulled out of that. So there are still ties that make it less strong than something that the United States would want to mention and the president would want to mention in his State of the Union address.
Very quickly, there's the word that comes out, that is the military advisors. Who really are these guys?
The military advisors that are on the ground in Iraq right now are supposed to be people helping to coordinate the attacks, people helping to coordinate the airstrikes that are real-time with the people who are on the ground that are real-time fighting the Islamic State militants. In addition to that, they're also trying to put advisors on to help with strategy, to help to how to push the Islamic State out of areas, how to really squeeze them in the best possible way.
All right. Thank you very much, Carla.
Thank you.
Well, Carla Babb reporting live via Skype. Well, European Union leaders are calling on Arab countries to join their efforts against terrorism. EU foreign ministers met on Monday in Brussels to discuss international cooperation in tracking members of terrorist sleeper cells. The head of the Arab League also attended. Global terrorism is also high on the agenda during the annual World Economic Forum, which started Wednesday in Switzerland. VOA Latza Hoke has more.
Muslims in many countries continue protests against French cartoons ridiculing the Prophet Muhammad and those who support the satire they deem offensive. Thousands of people gathered in the southern Russian region of Chechnya on Monday to rally against French satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo, whose staff members were killed earlier this month after publishing such cartoons. Protesters marched through the streets of downtown Grozny, condemning the satirists. Chechnya's pro-Moscow leader Ramzan Kadyrov called on fellow Muslims to resist provocation.
We are telling the world that Muslim people won't allow themselves to be used for destabilizing the situation in our country. We have always been reliable defenders of Russia, and today we can stand against any enemy of our country.
European countries have boosted security and are working to track down terrorist cells and their connections abroad in the wake of the Paris terrorist attacks that killed 17 people. A French police official said the country needs to modernize its technology to keep up with terrorists.
French criminal databases are a decade behind. Why? Because the databases are not interactive. They are not accessible by different police departments. They are not regularly updated. You have the data that shouldn't be there, and you have other data that is missing.
Terrorist attacks have killed more people in majority Muslim countries than in the West. The European Union has asked Arab League countries to join forces with Europe in fighting terrorism.
As the threat is not only the one we faced in Paris, but also spreading in many other parts of the world, starting from Muslim countries, and we need to strengthen our way of cooperating together.
The Arab League Secretary General said the organization will help efforts to undermine radical ideologies, but he made clear it will not join military efforts to fight Islamist militants.
The Arab League does not get into alliances. The Arab League has no desire to use arms. We are talking about a comprehensive confrontation, philosophical, economic, religious, media, educational, in schools. All these have to be confronted, and we are taking part in this. We have nothing to do with the military side.
The World Economic Forum will discuss risks of terror at its annual meeting in Davos next week.
Terror cannot be combated on a national basis. It needs international cooperation.
Forum founder Klaus Schwab said leaders must work on better coordination of their actions to prevent terror. Zlatica Hoke, VOA News, Washington.
Well, now to Yemen, where Houthi rebels have seized the presidential compound and attacked the president's home in the capital Sana'a, shattering a ceasefire reached Monday. The leader of the Shia faction says his group wants to rid the country of what he calls corruption and totalitarianism, but the international community has condemned the violence. Again, here's VOA's Zlatica Hoke.
Residents in Sana'a are worried after rebel attacks on the government resumed Tuesday.
We and all Yemeni people felt afraid yesterday during the clashes, so this is worrying.
Several residential buildings have been hit by artillery shells targeting the presidential palace and a key military base this week.
This attack on a civilian area, this is an awful development, especially a street that is usually full of cars and people. This is very unfortunate.
Rebels are protesting a government-proposed draft constitution that would divide Yemen into 6 federal states. On Saturday, they kidnapped the president's chief of staff, and in a fierce fight Monday, they took over the state media. Their leader broadcast his anti-government message on national television Tuesday.
Partnership is a national necessity, and it's really important in order to get rid of the political tyranny.
The United Nations condemned the attack Tuesday and called for an immediate release of the kidnapped government official.
The Secretary General urges all sides to remain fully engaged with his special advisor on Yemen so as to enable him to continue exercise the Secretary General's good offices in close cooperation with the members of the Gulf Cooperation Council and the United Nations Security Council.
Yemen's President Abed Rabo Mansour Hadi is a high-ranking military officer with no popular or tribal base. He was elected in 2012 as a consensus figure under a peace plan mediated by the United Nations and the Gulf states. During his 3 years in office, he has failed to bring stability to his country. The rebels, known as Houthis from northern Yemen, began their anti-government campaign last year and captured the capital in September. The violence is threatening to undermine efforts by the United States and its allies to battle al-Qaeda-linked groups in Yemen. Zlatica Hoke, VOA News, Washington.
We have more on Tuesday's clashes in Yemen, where loud gunfire could be heard across Sana'a. Well, witnesses initially reported seeing the Shia militiamen storming the presidential complex in the Yemeni capital. The rebel Houthis fighters later surrounded the prime minister's residence overnight. City residents were dealing with the aftermath of intense fighting on Monday. Several residential buildings were hit as shells struck near the presidential palace and a key military base. We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54, and check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Coming up, could 2015 be the continent's economic breakout year? Stay with us.
I am Shaka Sali, host and senior editor of VOA's international call-in talk show, Straight Talk Africa.
Today we'll examine the tobacco industry.
We pretty much touch on anything that you can think of. Politics, health issues, human rights issues, you name it, we talk about it. The issues that we discuss are pertinent to most people on the African continent. A very, very rare and unique opportunity to interact with their leaders.
Well, economic experts across Africa say this could be an exciting year for the continent's economies, which may start to move out of their traditional roles and into new sectors. In Johannesburg, Africa's economic capital, for now, VOA's Anita Powell reports on what may be in store for 2015 and beyond.
For as long as most economists can remember, African nations have provided the world with raw materials. Goods like oil, minerals, and agricultural products. But as 2015 dawns with oil prices plummeting, that may be changing. Those low prices may force some nations to diversify their offerings and cause investors to look to other opportunities. Experts gathered in Johannesburg, still the continent's economic hub, to discuss this new trend. Analyst Martin Davis says change is afoot.
Africa predominantly has been this commodity-driven economy where growth is aligned to commodity prices. We now see the headwinds of rapidly declining oil prices. What future does that hold out for continental growth, and what implications does that have for business? And I think arguably is Africa then sort of rebalancing away from traditional commodity-driven growth to one that is more balanced, more consumer-driven, and new wealth, new value being created beyond the simplistic business model of non-beneficiated raw materials.
That move away from commodities, says analyst Gareth Newham, could lead to less inequality, less corruption, and an overall better business environment.
And so there's a very close connection between good governance and the possibilities and opportunities for business going forward, and the opposite when there is not stability.
Davis predicts a geographic move as well.
So I think we're going to start to see the interest of business, the interest of capital move away from what's traditionally been oil-propelled economies in West Africa, think Nigeria, think Angola, amongst others, to more sort of East Africa, which is more resource poor, Kenya, Ethiopia, Tanzania. Yes, Tanzania is going to be a natural gas story going forward as well, and also Mozambique.
Gas prices are expected to stay low for much of the year. For many consumers around the world, it's an opportunity to save money. But for African economies, it might be a chance to grow in new directions. Anita Powell, VOA News, Johannesburg.
Well, for more insight on Africa's economic outlook, I'm joined by Francisco Ferreira, the World Bank's chief economist for Africa region. Mr. Ferreira, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you, Vince.
Now, first, do you share the thought that perhaps 2015 could actually be a very significant year for African economies?
I do, and I think exciting, the word that was used in the program, is a good word. Another word is challenging. So there's a glass half full, glass half empty story. You know, the good news, looking back a little bit, is in 2014, Africa grew more, grew faster than it did in 2013. Grew by 4.5% last year. Now, for 2015, at the World Bank, we've actually just recently lowered our forecasts from about 5% growth in Africa as a whole to 4.6%. And that reflects, in part, some of the challenges associated with what the person in the piece that we just saw referred to as headwinds. We used to have these tailwinds from commodity prices. Now, it's not just oil. It's a broader set of commodity prices that have been falling. And those are now creating a little bit of headwind. So there are challenges.
Now, how does the continent then overcome these challenges so that it can achieve higher economic growth, actually sustain whatever is currently going well, but also achieve even higher development objectives?
Well, the opportunity is, as was highlighted in the piece, economic diversification, right, and structural transformation, moving beyond natural resources and commodities and towards other sectors. The good news is that that has already started in Africa. The mixed news is that the structural transformation pattern that we had always expected to see, which was one of strong growth in manufacturing, has not really been observed in most countries. There are exceptions, like Ethiopia to some extent has a growing manufacturing sector, Nigeria, Tanzania. But apart from those countries, manufacturing has not been so dynamic. It's the services sector that's been growing very, very strong.
The manufacturing, some tell me that is very challenged by, of course, the big boy, China, that manages to manufacture at a very lower rate and undermines smaller economies like African economies. How do you surmount that?
Well, it's an interesting dynamic with China. I mean, you're absolutely right that China, by being able to manufacture and transport very cheaply. So let's not underestimate also the logistics capability and the transport capability that China has derived. Of course, is a very competitive economy. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, places where we do see some interesting manufacturing growth and investment in Africa, it's often by Chinese and not large Chinese state-owned firms.
Small-scale Chinese coming onto the continent.
Ethiopia is a good example of that. So there's two sides to that.
Also indigenous, which is another discussion that we need for another time. But very quickly, the issue of infrastructural development. How well is the continent doing as we get on to 2015?
It's doing better, but it needs to do much better still. And that, in fact, is part of the reason why I would describe 2015 not just as exciting, but also challenging, is that structural transformation, moving away from something you were doing, like natural resources, slowly towards other things, takes a bit of time. It takes time to build roads. It takes time to get more power and to connect people to power, to make electrical power reliable and accessible so that the manufacturing firms can come. You know, industries won't come if there are blackouts or if electricity is very expensive.
In the few seconds left, how does the World Bank help African continents figure out the best way to really spur even greater economic growth?
You know, we try to help through a combination of knowledge, dialogue, and money. We have a very robust lending program of upwards of $10 billion a year, and we're involved across the sectors of the economy, from health prevention and Ebola all the way to building power plants and electricity and so on.
Do you mind that there are other people operating in the same field like China?
No, we see them as partners. You know, interestingly, last week my boss, the Vice President for Africa, was in China talking about possible partnerships.
Interesting, World Bank partnering with China. Well, for the sake of the good. Thank you very much, Mr. Ferreira. Francisco Ferreira is the World Bank's chief economist for Africa region. Thanks. It's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54. A cop can't stop grooving as he shakes it off, and Taylor Swift likes what she sees. We'll be right back.
If you've just joined us, I'm Mariama Jallo, and here is a quick recap of today's headlines.
In Zambia, voting is extended for presidential elections where people were unable to get to the polls because of rain. In Nigeria, Boko Haram leader claims Baga attack in a new video and vows more attacks. In Niger, regional leaders meet in the capital Niamey to discuss ways to combat Boko Haram. In the Central African Republic, a UN staff member is released after being held briefly by a group believed to be linked to the anti-Balaka Christian militia. Finally, in Malawi, survivors desperate for aid after severe floods leave almost 200 people dead.
That's it for today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what's trending. If you've been on social media for the past few days, you've probably seen this guy. Well, this dash cam video of police officer Jeff Davis dancing and lip-syncing to Shake It Off went viral after it was first discovered and uploaded online by the Dover, Delaware Police Department. Now, this spirited rendition, complete with lip curl and hand gestures, was reposted by Taylor Swift herself on Twitter. The singer praised the officer's sass. Since it was posted on the internet, the video, Dover Police Dashcam Confessionals, has racked up over 20 million YouTube views and even has its own hashtag, DashcamDiva. Well, next up, another day, another robot breakthrough in Japan.
たちのようなアンドロイドが新しく作られたロボットについて報道発表するのは
Well, robots that look and speak like humans hosted their own news conference in Tokyo, conversing with each other and addressing the audience. Two female humanoid robots helped introduce two new little droid designs, the Sota and the Komyu, one of which will go on sale later in the year. Sota, a button-eyed robot that resembles a child's doll, goes on sale in July for $850, while Komyu will cost 5 times as much. And finally, one of France's most famous and delicious exports getting a reboot. While top French pastry chefs are reinventing the traditional eclair with a variety of trendy modern flavors. If you're not a fan of the traditional chocolate and coffee flavors, you have more flavors than ever to choose from, including praline, hazelnut, even fruit flavors. And there are even savory treats like sandwiches made with eclair pastry and filled with tuna, tomato, and cheese. The reinvented eclair has proven to be right with tourists. At this bakery, the eclairs range from $5 to $8 per pastry. And that is what is trending today. Well, that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on YouTube, on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight at 1800 UTC and in the mornings. Today, Break Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching. From all of us in Washington, have a good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute, where we teach you all about idioms in American English. If you have ever heard American English, you may have heard this.
A day late and a dollar short.
What does this mean? Let's find out by listening to an American English conversation.
Hey, did you hear Steve was late to the birthday party and he forgot to bring a gift?
Yes, I did. He's always a day late and a dollar short to everything.
I know.
When people say a day late and a dollar short, they mean you are too late, unprepared, or disorganized. You only want to say this with your friends because it's an informal phrase. You don't want to use this in a formal or a business setting because it may be rude. Remember, a lot of American English is delivered by your facial expressions. And that's English in a Minute.